Welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast with your hosts, Sandi and Jennifer Long.
Hi, welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu, or what we call OT Kung Fu for short. I'm Jen Long, Executive Coach and Master Trainer from Denver, Colorado, and I'm here, of course, with Sandi Varechia. Hi, Sandi.
Hey, Jen.
She's my co-host and executive coach from Satori Consulting in Toronto, Canada. And we're practicing executive coaches who work with organizations, both big and small, to gain some focus and discipline, that's the Kung Fu part, in managing and leading. And this is why we call it the Kung Fu. Personal management and leadership transformation happens with discipline and focus over time. So as your managers and leaders change, so does your organization.
Right, and that's really what we're here to help everybody with. So in this episode, we're excited to share with you our information and experience today about organizational thinking and practice on coaching versus managing. If there's one thing we know as master coaches, most organizations really need some kung fu around the idea of what is a coaching culture. Jen, maybe you can start us off by talking a little bit about things that you've experienced as a coach and as a consultant around the topic of coaching.
Yeah, so this idea of a coaching culture, I think, has been on the uptick for companies over the last, 5 years, I want to say. So maybe let's really think about what we're talking about when we use that term. Based on the industry events that I've attended, I think in general out there, and in reading the blogs and the newsletters, I think what we're really talking about is the fact that companies are looking for managers to really get a lot better at developing people, not just managing them, right? Mm-hmm. So this big shift in this focus is the focus on improving through more consistent and frequent feedback to employees from managers. So of course, this is a great idea, right? Most people really do want to do some kind of feedback, and they want to know how they're doing, and they want to know what they could be doing better. So I think it's fair to say that most people do come to work and they want to do a good job. So how do we keep ramping that up? Mm-hmm. I think coaching employees, because coaching has garnered this reputation for impacting performance, right? It's the new big strategy now. So we're looking for, companies are saying, we're looking for our managers to take a coaching approach to performance improvement. So now organizations have invested in getting their managers what we're calling coaching skills, right? And over the last 5 years or so, companies have paid a lot of money to train managers how to coach. But I see that they're still struggling to really achieve a step change in how managers actually engage in coaching.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually think it's longer than 5 years that this transition towards coaching culture has been swinging, right, from managing. But I agree, and I think it's a great idea. And I think the intentions of organizations for managers to get more engaged on the development side with employees is a natural progression for managers to take. But it's not an easy one, as we're going to probably talk more about today. But you're right, they're struggling. They really are. I think the problem is probably that most organizations, for most organizations, is twofold. First, results always come when managers are evaluated on their performance. Right? Did the team deliver against that expectation? Did they reach the target dollar amount in revenue or cost savings? Did they implement? Did they implement quickly on target? Did they reach their goal? The qualitative data always seems to trump everything. And second, I think managers are rarely held accountable for actually coaching their employees. So they talk a lot about it and they use the word coaching, but there's little accountability. So it's no doubt that managers are having difficulty understanding really what the difference between coaching and managing really is.
Yeah.
It's like coaching is this afterthought that doesn't get too much of attention until the light gets shone back on it, right? And then people get all excited about it again. Yeah. So to be fair, I think this might be changing somewhat. There's increased conversation about it, but overall, I don't think the conversations are making that big of a difference. So there's been many studies to look at the effectiveness of coaching skills for managers. The International Coaching Federation has looked at it and tracked this phenomenon to see what impact coaching is having in this regard. And overall, the results aren't great. And I think everybody, I don't know, I was thinking, because we've talked about it for so long, the results aren't really all that great. And I think everybody thought they would be tremendously different when you start implementing these coaching cultures.
Right. I think they had a much higher expectation what they actually saw when they looked at it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think everybody thought they'd get some amazing results, and that isn't to say that it's not at least better than doing nothing, but I think it's a little disappointing when you look at coaching and its ability to really drive return on investment, right, with executives and teams. So what's the deal with the managers? So I think part of it is a semantics issue, which is impacting the expectations and the results that they want. I think that coaching, and I'm using air quotes here if you can see me, coaching skills are, for the most part, people see that as feedback skills, and they're starting to use that kind of thinking interchangeably. So managers might be getting better at feedback, but it really doesn't translate into development or significant improvement. Employees might be getting better information about what they're doing or not doing well, but that doesn't mean that they agree with that or that they've been given any support or direction to improve on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom line, I think, is that coaching and feedback are not the same thing. And I also think that if coaching skills are real coaching skills, so for example, I know a lot of large companies have invested in like the GROW model training for managers, just as one example. And the GROW model, for those of you who might be listening and thinking, well, what the heck is that? GROW is an acronym, right? Goal. The G stands for goal, the R for reality, the O for options, and the W stands for will. And it's really kind of meant to simplify the coaching into a conversation that targets the goal or change of the improvement and balances that against the reality, right? What are you doing? And what can be done to be implemented or changed? And then it asks you to consider, what are the options for that? And then what are the steps for the actual, and what's for the actual change? And then what's the willingness to get there, right? So in my mind, great, easy little acronym, fantastic from a coaching perspective. But I think it's also, from a business perspective, it feels like a SWOT, right? Which is your opportunities and threats for business, right? When you think about that. And so when I think about when I've done a SWOT, that's like a half-day event, with my team. And so when I think managers start to think about the GROW model, they are starting to think about, well, that's a huge conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they're intimidated by what that model is asking them to do, and that it feels messy and time consuming. And it feels like, oh God, as a manager, I need to know a lot more than I potentially do. And maybe it's more than I'm really interested in knowing and spending time on, right? I'm here to drive results for the company. So maybe they're thinking I'm being asked to perform an entirely different role that makes me uncomfortable. And for the most part, I don't feel like I know enough to do it. So I don't.
Yeah. I think you hit on something really important there, Jen. It really feels that when you have these models and things like that, for me, I think it's like, who owns the coaching? And is it the coachee who owns the coaching that they're going to have, or is it the manager who owns the coaching? Because I think your point about it feels overwhelming when you have to go through this model of setting the goals and understanding the reality and listing the options and then figuring out the will of somebody to do something. It's really, I think, difficult to say, well, I don't, to really think about how much time you have to invest to get ready for each coaching session. So if you have multiple employees, it could be exceptionally daunting to say, I don't have that much time to prepare. Right. And to your point, I don't have enough information. And so I don't know what I don't know. And so then you don't have the conversation because it becomes this block.
Right. Yeah. It just becomes, here's a whole bunch of reasons why I can't get it done.
Right.
Besides the fact that, I've got all this other work that I need to get done. Right.
Yeah. So you go back because as you said, right, the bottom line kind of trumps everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go back to managing rather than coaching because it's just easier. It's easier to tell someone to do something than to have a conversation about them that will motivate them and potentially change their perception and on what they're doing and the work that they're doing.
Exactly. And I think your point about they've got to be a willing participant. I mean, that's the first rule of coaching when you come in from the outside, right? Don't give me somebody that is disengaged that you want me to fix, because chances are the coaching's too little too late. And
Yeah.
and so if it's about a developmental mindset, you've got to have a willing participant. They've got to be willing to say, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to make the time, I'm going to do all that in addition, right? So
Yeah.
that's part of it.
Yeah, and like I can't stress enough. I think it's the coachee has to own that piece of it. Like you can lead a horse to water, what that analogy is, but you can't make them do anything else once you get there. And
Right.
so it's really important that the employee sees the benefit of the time that they're investing as well.
Right. Right. So I think we both got some interesting insights on this and how we're seeing it and experience it. So maybe if we were to help our listeners out, what do you think organizations need to get clear on to move forward in this coaching culture idea? Or how do we outline for them what a coaching culture really is from a coach's perspective?
Right, right. Manager to coach are only one part of the concept of a coaching culture, right? If we're trying to achieve a culture, there's a focus on coaching as a way of being, as opposed to a thing that you just do for executives or for your managers, or who are either derailed or newly promoted or whatever. Coaching is something that's done in 360 degrees when you achieve a coaching culture. Like it truly is a way of being. It's a fundamental shift in your organization.
Right. Right. And it's not managing. It's
Yeah.
not just feedback, right? Um, uh, I sort of think of it more like teamwork. If you're going to be a team player, this means you and all your other teammates have similar skill sets. So while you might play a specific position, and here I go on my team metaphors, if you might play a specific position or hold a particular role in the organization, you play that position, but you also have to pass the ball, right? You've got to have a clear shared result, and you work with other teammates regardless of the position to score, so to speak, right? So to do this well, you practice as a team, right? You all run the same drills. So obviously on like a basketball thinking here,
Yeah.
hoping this metaphor provides a better picture of how coaching really works in a culture. So when you think about, when you're working as the team and you're on the court and you're practicing, input's given to every player to make the team operate as a whole. All the players are coached, not just by one leader, but by each other in the moment, right? So if I'm down at the end of the court with my hand in the air, I'm telling you I'm open, pass me the ball. It's that in the moment engagement. Do you see me? And are we communicating? Because I can help you out, right? It's that play by play as much as it is the practice side. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And that's why I think when we talk about that in that moment, in that play by play, it gets mucky when you're saying, but you need to put a model around it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think models are important, and I think they kind of guide the process. But I think it's one of those things that without those really effective tools in that, people get stumped, right? Oh, now I want to be in the moment. Oh, but I need to do these 5 steps or these 4 steps or these 8 steps.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a bit more problematic in the business environment. Right? So
Right.
the development of the conversations happens all the time. It happens between all the employees, so peer to peer, manager to direct reports, managers to leaders, leaders to everyone. And it needs to happen not quarterly, or because you've got scorecards to complete, semi-annually, or annually or quarterly or whatever it might be. And that's a big ask for businesses to do and to do well. I think the other piece of that for me is like who owns the coaching within the business. So if it's not done by everyone, so we're saying, we're going to put a coaching culture in, and so these middle managers, we want you to coach, but it's not done at senior executive levels, right? So they're not walking the talk. And so I think it's when you're creating that culture, it has to be a holistic culture and not something that's just done at certain levels.
Right, right. There's got to be a whole thing that comes in it. And sort of like as a whole sidebar here, I think there's an issue too of who coaches internally, right? So managers and their direct reports, you've got that relationship of supposedly of trust and openness. So that's a good place to put it. But I think partly too is they're bringing on an internal bench in some organizations. And who are those people?
Mm-hmm.
And what
Yeah.
qualifies them, And one of the issues that we've always talked about, and being in coaching for 30 years, and when you look at people always want to do it internally, and yeah, you absolutely should, but there is, especially in big companies, I think a whole issue that has to be addressed around confidentiality.
Yes.
When you're bringing in the external coach, that's intact, and there's a release valve there for people to be able to speak their mind, to really get to some of the things that need to be dealt with. Whereas I think when you're trying to do that internal structure and you're working internally, the confidentiality can create an issue, because if somebody you're working with says something that you think, this could potentially be an HR issue, what then is your obligation to say something to HR?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it can get pretty mucky, I think, internally, and I agree. Like, I think there does need to be internal coaches, but that whole issue of confidentiality does come up a lot, and how much people are actually willing to share.
Right.
Right. The whole idea of the coaching is to have this open dialogue, and if there's any sense of a wall that's going to go up if you talk about certain topics, then you're not having that open dialogue. You just can't.
Right. And so if you're not, so maybe if you've even gotten as far as having that, your people may not share to the level they need to get breakthrough, to take something on, to be open. They're just like, I'm doing this coaching thing because I've been asked to, but with no real intention of how do I make this change.
Yeah. So we'll keep on a little sidebar for a sec. I'm just curious about your thoughts on why organizations want to go internally versus externally.
I think part of it is that you can see the impact, right? So if you've had good external coaches and everybody gets a taste of it, and you've had good relationships and strategies and impacts into the business with whatever, I think it's a natural progression that they're like, why can't we do this for ourselves? This seems pretty straightforward. I also think that employees want more of that kind of engagement relative to their development, as opposed to send me to training, right? Coaching's personalized, very targeted to you in your moment, in your circumstance kind of thing, which, training programs don't provide. So I think there's a pull by the people who are like, I want a better experience. And because if you're good at it as a manager, as an internal coach, it creates the kind of environment that is supportive and is disciplined around its support, right?
Yeah.
So I think it makes it easier when you get frustrated, when you get stuck, when you get stymied, if you know you've got an internal structure, to pull a coach in to go, hey, right, I'm having difficulty with my team. Can you facilitate our next session and help us get through whatever this is?
Right.
So, I can see there's huge value in it if you can get the level of coaching I think people experience when they work with somebody who's good from the outside.
I totally agree. So there must be a sports analogy that I could pull together, but I have none. So I'm going to bring it back on track and say, we really want to talk about coaching in reference to managing.
Right.
So, what do you think? Let's compare.
So when we compare to managing, I think managing is really about the work, the tasks, the projects, right? It's about setting the expectations, modifying the expectations, giving the feedback about how you're doing against those expectations, right? So putting that into the basketball metaphor, I think that managing is more like the scoreboard and the referee. How are we doing, right? What's the score? Are we fouling out? Are we playing by the rules we've established? Are we making the right decisions given the parameters? And are the right players in the game at the right time? That to me is what managing is. Managing is the time clock and how that drives the effort, right? What are the deadlines? What's the schedule? How are we getting it done? Are the right people in it? That's the managing side. Whereas I see coaching is the conversation during the timeout, right? To evaluate the situations and strategize the improvements to get the results in the moment. So in basketball, that happens in just a minute, right? When you call that timeout, and in less than a minute, everyone agrees and makes the appropriate changes, right? Alterations in approach, speed, focus, and to play to get to score, basically. Coaching is that disciplined ownership of the input provided, right? But it's also it's the feedback, but it's also the acknowledgement and the initiative of the player to take on the subsequent actions and engage the change. I think a lot of businesses can do the feedback, but it's the discipline of engaging the change that generally misses the mark. So I don't know. What do you think would help our listeners here?
Well, I think to start, I think it's really defining what feedback is, right? And we know that a lot of people are concerned about giving feedback because when we talk about feedback, we think about it as being negative, right? So I think
Right.
one of the first things that listeners need to understand is the importance of feedback, and why it's kind of paramount to that coaching relationship, being able to listen and engage and provide feedback for people's or personal development.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
So I think that's one piece of it. And I think there is that fear around feedback, but I think it is an important piece. I think also recognizing when you're in that management zone versus a coaching zone. And a lot of people that I work with, for sure, they've learned how to manage. They've learned how to manage well. They've learned from their mentors how to manage, but they haven't really truly been taught to coach. So we may give them a model. We may say have conversations, but as you say, that conversation that you have with a master coach from outside and feeling the shift that you get with that, they haven't been taught to have those sort of conversations.
Right.
And so I think really what's going to help our listeners is to if they understand the why the organization wants to move into a coaching culture. So why are you doing it? Like, why is the organization doing it? Are they doing it because it's the flavor of the week? Are they doing it because they want to really shift the organization and move the level of their management staff and everybody in terms of their conversational skills? So really getting clear on the why they're doing it, and then ensuring that you're rolling it out with some with the budget to support it.
Yeah.
That it's fully engaged in the internal processes, and it's not just a department here or a department there or a person over there.
Right.
And I think the other piece is building in that accountability, the so what of the coaching.
Right. So this was kind of an issue that came up. I did a whole presentation on. I pulled up like the data from the ICF. I pulled up the data from there was some other organization, HCI or somebody. They're doing all this measurement of this internal coaching effort. Right? How are we doing? And the big issue the first couple of years was it's not happening because they don't get enough training on the coaching skills. And so they're like, all right, we're going to train them on the coaching skills. So then they train them on the coaching skills, right? The GROW model came in and they're still not doing it. Why are they not doing it now? And then they're not being held accountable for doing it. And so I find this interesting because I'm like, it's not that you have a coaching problem. You have an accountability problem.
Absolutely.
And if you can't do accountability for coaching, you're probably not doing accountability for managing. And so in my view, if you're going to get to a coaching culture, the only way you're going to get there is to deal with your accountability problems first. Because that discipline and accountability is as much a coaching skill as anything else.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And that's why you pay somebody from the outside to come in, because they're going to hold your feet to the fire.
Yeah.
They're going to say, don't waste my time. Right.
But don't you find, though, Janet, organizations, like they don't want to give feedback because of fear of feedback, and they don't want to hold people accountable for fear of holding people accountable.
Right.
And so, I use the word fear lightly, but all these things are holding people back because they haven't been given the skills and that toolbox to actually do them well.
Right. So let's talk about the toolbox, right? So there's deeper. It's like, so first you got your accountability thing, but so maybe they master that. Maybe they get to the coaching part, but coaching skills are coaching skills. But as a manager, I lean into my coaching skills to do development, but development on what? And I think that's the next roadblock.
Yeah.
Right?
And is it because they don't know what they need to develop, or they haven't been given, I keep using the word tools, and I don't want to use that word, but they don't know where to go to find what they need to develop them on.
Right. Can I diagnose this and then provide an option? So if I know enough about, I've got to know enough about the role, the person I'm trying to manage and coach, right? So the role stuff is the easy stuff. It's the stuff that's outside the role. It's the relationship stuff, right? So this is when we get into, what are some of the things that we always are coaching is things like communication skills, team development, right? Interpersonal kinds of relationship stuff, in addition to, I think the things that like intimidate managers, like emotional intelligence.
Right.
Right. So when we talk about, you got to have your coaching skill set, you also have to have your manager toolbox. And part of the coaching experience is knowing the rest of the tools in there, right? And that is things like, what are communication styles? What are team behaviors? What is emotional intelligence? And how do I teach that to you and help you understand so that you can actually do it on your own?
Right. And so it becomes this bigger thing than just wanting to have a coaching culture. Right? There's so many pieces that have to be in place to actually make it work and make it work well. And I think organizations that get it are able to step back and plan for it, much like you would with a strategy for an organization or a transformational shift. There's got to be that planning that goes into it to make sure that everybody gets everything that they need in order to be effective at it.
Right. So, gosh, time-wise, investment-wise, what does that really mean? And I think that can be daunting, right? Because I think if you're going to do a coaching culture and you're going to do it right, you got to step it in, you got to phase it out. Here's what we're going to start with. Here's what we're going to move into. Here's what we're going to create internally. Here's how we're going to fund it and support it and budget it. Here's how we're going to deliver it. You know what I mean? There's all this stuff that's got to kind of go into it. You've got to do it over time, and you've got to, I think, demonstrate success the whole way, or it's really easy to lose buy-in. And I think organizations can find themselves somewhere in that path, putting coaches into the environment. And because the coaches aren't consistently, as an organization, then there's managing the coaching organization. That in and of itself is its whole thing, right? It's like herding cats. If you've ever tried, Sandy and I both work with coaches, and we run coaches, and we develop coaches and bring them into organizations. And so that whole practice of, how do I manage these people and how do I know they're being effective, as opposed to just showing up and having conversations with folks.
Yeah. So it's not a one and done thing, right?
No.
This whole notion of coaching, great idea, great theory, and a great practice, but it needs to be systematically in place.
Right.
And
So
I was going to say, you're not going to get to that way of being without some process and rigor behind it.
Right. And I think that's the part that people are coming up short on consistently. And let's talk about Kung Fu. It is disciplined practice to be a good coach. And you have to walk the talk all the time if you're going to demonstrate your credibility. And if I'm going to run a bunch of you, what am I doing to ensure that you are masters of your trade? And that, and I think a lot of times people, they just, they give them coaching skills and send them out there. And then they find this guy's working on, he read a book on happiness. And so he's all off on this happiness thing with whoever he's talking to. And then somebody else read some other book, on something else. And we're doing that. And then you've got no consistency in your organization around what's happening.
Yeah. Which I think is really why we default to managing versus coaching, because it just seems easier and we know it.
Well, yeah, and it's all about the results at the end of the day, because the top level's going, what are you doing, you guys?
Yeah. Stop talking.
Get
some work done.
Stop talking. Get the stuff done. So I don't know. Hopefully we've given you some help in understanding that it's a long journey. If you're going to do it, coaching culture, it's an expensive journey. Um, but there's definite strategy and intention, like any other business initiative, that you've got to have, and you got to be really clear first and foremost on the difference between managing and coaching and what that looks like, especially if you're looking at a group who's supposed to do both.
Yeah.
Because if there's no clarity for them on when am I managing versus when am I coaching, and if you're calling it feedback, you're just making it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other piece of that is why are you doing it?
Yeah.
What is the benefit to your organization to go down this path? Because when you're clear on your why you're doing something, it's easier to put the pieces in place.
Yes. And go back to podcasts on strategy.
Yeah, that's right. Excellent.
All right. Well, hopefully that's been helpful and insightful for those of you who are on that journey. I'm Jen Long in Denver, and I will talk to you next time. Sandi?
And I'm Sandi Verrecchia in Toronto, and it's another great podcast, and we enjoy everyone that we do, and would like some feedback if you have any for us. So Jen, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, and please visit Sandi's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI consultinginc.ca, and Jen's website at managementpossible.com. Thanks again.